I'm now going to open the session up for questions. So if you haven't already, please type them into the chat box. And if relevant, you might include the name of the speaker to whom you're directing the question. And just know that because of the limited time that we have, we may not get to all of the questions today. But we do have one question that has come in already, and that is for Dr. Roberto. And the question is there any compelling research on behavioral interventions at the individual level, rather the environmental level, that may be able to help address inequities? Can behavioral precision be applied at the inter-individual level? I don't know if you have any reactions there.
Sure, thanks for that question. I mean, we definitely have a very long history and a lot of literature on behavioral interventions at the individual level, even if you just look at behavioral weight loss treatment. And I would say the story there is, you know, it's really important to be able to offer people compassionate care that's effective. There are many studies that support behavioral weight loss interventions can help people lose, 5 to 10% of their body weight. That's clinically meaningful. But it's not going to be the strategy that sort of moves the needle on a population level. But people are certainly exploring, even within like a behavioral weight loss treatment, for example, how can that be tailored for food insecure populations where a lot of the current messages or guidance are very hard for someone with food insecurity to respond to. So I think there's always more work being done to tailor those interventions. I just think it's the same kind of challenge that, yes, we need them. They're important. They help people. They're still sort of far from where we need to be to really tackle this at the population level.
Robin, this is Rob. I just wanted to add that inter-individual group behavior is, I think, one of the hottest areas to work on now. And I think as Michael Howell showed yesterday, if we look at things like mobility reports that were put out, you can really see geospatially and temporally how groups operate together with these inter-networked social and behavioral interactions. And I think the difference now is we can actually measure them in ways that were entirely impossible before. The question now is, what are the interventions that go beyond the individual that can achieve the desired effect in groups of people? We're certainly seeing that play out in vaccination right now, and sometimes good and sometimes really bad ways.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Anybody else wanting to jump in there? I'm just looking around. And if not, there was another question came up that I'm sure will be of interest to several on the panel. Generally, FDA has only allowed health claims for the population as a whole, with precision nutritional interventions. Will that require claims for targeted populations? And what is needed to allow claims for target populations?
I mean, Robin, I don't see that. Peter, I know will have a viewpoint on this, but I don't see that as any.
I'm pretty sure Martin will as well, and probably others.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same as a drug claim, in my view. You just need to have the evidence. If your evidence shows that this works in people with ingrown toenails, it doesn't work in people without ingrown toenails, then your claim should be about people with ingrown toenails. But I think the reason there aren't many claims like that in food is the evidence generation system hasn't been targeted the way it now could be. But I don't think there's any reason why the FDA would want to allow a general claim for something where the benefit was only in a targeted population.
Yeah, well, I certainly agree with that. From a practical point of view, though, when it comes to negotiating the claim with the agency, in all probability, the company will be there asking for a broader claim rather than a more restricted one, because a more restricted one would limit the market. And that's the point that I made earlier with respect to precision medicine. Some of the enthusiasm was muted because what it would have done was restricted the market, right? So I agree with Rob. The permitted claim should not exceed the evidence, but one can expect that the companies would like to expand that And that's a kind of an irony, right? Is you get your personalized claim based on personalized data, and then when you go to negotiate with the agency, you might try to expand the population again. So I think that's the way it would probably play out.
Well, just to be the devil's advocate here, I disagree. I think that there's a tremendous opportunity here, and I think we're losing out on this opportunity if we're not allowing the communication to be effective and targeting the population at risk. There currently are regulatory classifications for medical foods, which are foods that are designed to specifically address the unique needs that exist because of a disease. They have to be done under supervision. And quite frankly, if you have identified type 2 diabetes and have a nutritional intervention that can be very effective for them, there is a regulatory structure that allows that to take place. And my concern is that, we should be having this discussion with FDA right now. First and foremost, the science has to support the intervention. But when the science is there, if we don't provide a regulatory mechanism that allows this information to be communicated truthfully and factually, we're going to force people into the Uber model. And that scares me, because I would much rather see FDA as the intermediary to make certain there's a level playing field and that we have very rigorous reviews taking place. And otherwise, it's going to be the wild, wild west. We're seeing that happening today, and I would like to actually see there be more discipline. And Peter, you and I may not always agree, but I actually agree we need better regulation and we need better science. And that's what I would like to see happen.
Yeah, I was about to say, Martin, that I was going to disagree with you by saying that we don't disagree. And I think that that's actually so. But the example that you provide with, food as medicine, that is a pathway that is available, but it's an unattractive one from a commercialization point of view because it requires the physician intermediary. And where the money is to be made is in advertising all of this to the general public. That's where the money is, and that's where the very challenges to getting the balance right with respect to communication exist.
Right. Thanks. And Dr. Patsy, did you want to say something? I saw you on mute.
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
No worries. Thank you. So another question that has come in. Given what we've experienced with the pandemic, how do we prevent further erosion of public trust with personalized nutrition, given the need for more public health, not elite nutrition?
That's sort of the question of the year right now. I mean, I don't know of any. I'll just say, the most important thing is scientific integrity, but there's a lot to what Martin was saying about how we communicate. I mean, I am getting a lesson right now in YouTube because we're working on the quality of the medical information on YouTube. I just had no idea there was an entire generation that doesn't read. They just look at videos. I mean, 500 billion downloads of COVID information. So, and if you look at most of what we put out scientifically, it's tables and text that, most of the people are just not going to pay attention to. And so, but then when you connect emotionally with people, which is really the key way to change behavior, we need a system that gets that to be accurate and reliable. And I don't think the methods are there yet. It's another area. I learned to really appreciate the research that went on in FDA about consumer behavior. We need a lot more of it to give us the rules. Because if we just turn out dry information, it's not going to work.
Right. And I see, both Josh, looks like you're wanting to jump in, and then probably Christina.
Yeah, I'll start. I think there's kind of two parts to this question, but I want to build a little bit on some of Robert's comments. This first part is, how do you keep from eroding confidence? And my concern in all this, we talk about, consumers or users of personalized nutrition as it's somebody else out there, that these aren't real people. If you want to establish a relationship or avoid eroding confidence, you have to build that relationship. It's pieces of information at a time, being honest about, if you're looking at it from a company standpoint, about what you can do well as what you can't do that well. There was a really wonderful presentation the other day, and in the discussion session, and I apologize, I'm forgetting the woman's name, but a question was asked, and she said, I don't know about that. Now, that doesn't pull the rug out from underneath all the incredible knowledge that she shared. But, and I think it's just being honest about what a program can do and can't do. And people have been very reluctant to do that, but I think it's one of the most important ways that you can start to build a dialogue. I think it's an important way to establish transparency and trust with the user. And as you build data, you're like, and here's additional information we have, and here are some other things that we can help you do. So I think it's just that balance. I think that whether it is a company or an agency or guidance, I think it has to be in that type of a construct. We have to remember it's humans that are on the receiving end of this, and each one of those are going to be different.
Great, thanks, Josh. And Christina, did you want to jump in?
I was just going to add, because I was thinking about this, are there opportunities so that this doesn't just sort of sit with the elite? And Peter just mentioned food as medicine, and I share some skepticism about that. But I was thinking about medically tailored meals, which have been around for a long time, or now there's more sort of rigorous research on, meals that are designed for certain populations. So you have a cancer diagnosis, you're at home following treatment or surgery. There are community-based organizations that for free will bring you these meals prepared that you can consume. Seth Berkowitz has done some nice research on this. It seems to be associated with reduced healthcare spending later, or ER visits later, that sort of thing. And so I can imagine a world where precision nutrition is able to inform the design of those kinds of meals that are then paid for by insurance companies if we can demonstrate that they're actually cost saving. And so that's just one example, and perhaps one opportunity where we can kind of get it out of the just thinking about, individual consumers who are able to access it, and think about a system or a structure that it could be incorporated into that would support lower income individuals.
This is Patsy, and I wanted to comment from the standpoint of something that I've considered relative to the lay public's reaction to what they consider nobody knows what's going on with COVID, and to some extent with the vaccination data as well. And that is the general scientific illiteracy of the public, and how we present evolving stories where we don't have all the data, and where our conclusions might be modified as we get more data. And I think that's a big challenge. I don't have an answer for it, but I think as we think about communication strategies, we need to be clear about this is what we understand now. And this is the best advice for now. And I don't know how that will affect trust, but I think it's worth finding out.
And that really goes to what Josh was saying before as well, about being clear about what we do and what we don't know, but communicating that appropriately.
Can I add to that a little bit?
Please do.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, Patsy, and certainly to draw it out more. And, we've heard Dr. Fauci, for example, being accused of lying, when in fact what's happening is scientific information is accruing. That those two things are not the same. And but what that goes to, as you say, is a fundamental lack of understanding of the evolution of scientific information. How it is that we build a case for something, how we come to a conclusion ultimately, what formal structures we have for codifying those conclusions, like in the DGAs, for example. But I guess what strikes me is that the pace of that evolution and the pace of regulatory progress often are not commensurate with one another. And they're certainly not commensurate with the pace of the internet. And so the proliferation of new claims is almost instantaneous. And, having, tried to work through a regulation or a guidance at FDA, I can tell you those are not even on the same time scale. The amount of time that's involved in policing a claim, in bringing an enforcement action, in notice and comment. And so it's likely that because they're more nimble, the people with claims will always outpace the regulatory process. And I don't claim to have a solution to that, but at least I feel I can identify the problem.
I think I just want to reemphasize. It was one of the points I was trying to make when I showed the picture of the cell phone. Let's go outside the U.S. Low-income countries, on average, have more cell phones per person than high-income countries, and it's just as instantaneous there. And so, an advertiser can reach 4 billion people in a month. The regulatory process takes a lot longer, and it has many advantages. I mean, people do learn about things quickly, but it also has the risks that are so obvious. And we're going to have to come up with new regulatory strategies to deal with this.
Right. So we had another question that came in. How does the panel or panel members propose that the precision nutrition community can best take into consideration or include social determinants like sex, gender, racial, ethnic differences, cultural differences in the methodologies, in the designs, to best advance the science along with incorporating the theories of behavioral changes that were discussed?
Well, maybe I'll start, although I'm going to be very interested to hear what Christina has to say.
Yes, and I can see Christina.
This is her wheelhouse.
Yes. Go ahead.
So one thing that has struck me about the way many of the speakers engaged in precision nutrition research, whether in academia or in industry settings, is the thoughtfulness of how data is being collected, and the recognition that there is going to need to be the use of big data analysis to look at that. So I think collecting data on some of these factors and building it into the models is important. One of the reasons why I brought up behavioral change is there are ways to ask people for information that would help you assess what stage of change they might be in, what their health beliefs might be. One of the speakers from the first day talked about actually asking people what the barriers are that they perceive. That can definitely be part of the planned behavior theory as well as other of these theories. So I think there are ways of collecting data and building it in, and then you can analyze for what are these characteristics that then are predictive of success and uptake and change in behavior that you're looking for. So that's sort of my less than deeply educated viewpoint.
Go ahead, Christina.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to compliment the question and say that I definitely do not have a good answer. I was hoping as I was putting together my talk, I would offer a solution. I don't have one, but as people have been talking, a few things have come to mind. I mean, I really like the point Patsy just made. I mean, I think thinking about people and the kinds of data we're collecting, not just at this, individual level or even the behavioral phenotype, but also trying to make sure you're sort of assessing other attributes in terms of people's cultural context, community context, literally the census tract they live in as one of these inputs. Because if we think about sitting down with someone and telling them, look, you've got a genotype where you're going to respond to, a more protein heavy diet, and then they might not, and culturally they eat meat, but they might not be able to afford actually to eat a lot of protein, there's all these complexities. And so I think to Patsy's point, I think those data need to get integrated. There needs to be these mappings of the relevant environmental constructs that are going to go hand in hand with the individual level ones when we're giving this kind of prescriptive information.
I would just add that when we use the word precision, people go right away to genetics or biology. People's behavior and social interactions are also just as measurable using essentially the same methods, but different qualities of people. And it's a well-known feature of advertising to segment populations by their behavioral phenotypes, which are increasingly easily measurable. So I think it's going to be important as we do the research to measure these things. And I think one of the risks, which is playing out in the pharmaceutical industry is that if the profit is higher in one segment than in another segment, there's a real risk of not including the unprofitable segment in the research itself. So you're not equipped then to deal with it. And I think we're going to, just like we're doing now in drug and device trials, we're going to have to take that into account in nutritional trials also, and try to have rules that require that the research include inclusive populations.
Right. And I know one of the earlier speakers, for instance, I think it was day one, was talking about the behavior arm and incorporating that. And kind of on this theme of designs and how to encode, certainly we heard a lot of emphasis on the need for more research, more science, and different types of designs, bringing in different things under the skin, outside of the skin. But there's one question that could relate to in a number of ways. From an earlier speaker, actually, what about N of 1 study designs? Some are proponents of these designs. Where does that fit in this, as we're thinking about precision nutrition and personalized nutrition?
Well, I'm a clinical trialist, so N of 1 is a great design for looking for short-term effects and for tailoring things to individuals. And it has several really interesting applications. There's a meeting just about the research paradigm that NAM is holding, I think, next week, that I'm participating in, where that's going to be one of the big topics of discussion. The main risk of N of 1, and I see, is that if you look at Dr. Brannon's really excellent presentation about biomarkers, surrogates, intermediates, causal inference, one of the characteristics of biology is that often a change in a biomarker in the short term is not predictive of the overall outcome in the long term. And so N of 1 often is done over a short period of time to reliably see an effect in an individual person, and the effects can be summed over the population using well-described methods. But there's a risk that you can draw the wrong conclusion only looking at short-term outcomes.
Maybe I'll just add one other thought on N of 1. And overall, I do like the approach in terms of building some of the evidence base. The other thing where it can become difficult when you're doing an N of 1 experiment is I think that the strongest evidence is where you have the ability to do a crossover design. If you're looking at a complicated program that is including nutrition, lifestyle, behavior, there's going to be a certain level of learning that makes that very, very difficult. And, again, it creates challenges in terms of scaling it. So I think for like a targeted short-term intervention, it can be a valuable tool. But I think there's challenges when we're trying to kind of look at this in a holistic way from a clinical study standpoint.
Although, just go ahead, Peter.
I'll just add that they are most useful when the mechanism of action is very clearly defined, and when the outcome measures are objective. So you certainly don't want N of 1 trials that have subjective outcomes like I feel better. And you want to restrict yourselves to those where the science is absolutely clearest. And there might be some role for it.
Right.
I don't think I was going to add.
Oh, so why don't I jump in? So it sounds like Martin, then I think Christina wanted to jump in, and then Rob. So Martin.
No, but personalized nutrition is one. So, I mean, the whole objective here is to try to tailor, whether it's an app or the nutrition, to an individual person. Now, I agree that if you're talking about competent, reliable scientific evidence, a study of one is not going to withstand regulatory scrutiny. But I do think that there are, I'm not really quite certain what they're going to, but all of personalized nutrition and all these apps that are being developed, and the role here ultimately is to tailor on an individual basis the diet that's going to be best for them.
So Christina, thanks, Martin.
I was just going to add from a methods perspective, because I think it relates to Rob's point about who's not being studied and equity, which is even in basic nutritional epidemiology, Emily Oster has a nice paper recently that makes this point where a study gets done, let's say, shows relationship between, vitamin E and cancer risk. And it's a statistical, anomaly by chance it happened. It's not a real finding. That gets covered in the news. Higher educated people start taking vitamin E. You study that over time, that relationship becomes stronger because healthy people are taking vitamin E and they already have lower cancer risk. And so I think that's going to be important for any, studying any kind of nutritional idea, that if certain populations are adhering to these diets that are already healthier, they're going to make relationships look stronger. And we want to just make sure that, research is being done within a broader group.
Thank you. And Rob, go ahead.
I'm thinking that we're going to be in agreement on this, but just to respond to Peter and bring in what Josh said, in an N-of-1 trial, I would argue subjective outcomes are actually really good to use if you can do the crossover and have a placebo. And so, for example, in statin side effect trials, N-of-1 trial really clarified that the majority of people who say they have side effects on statins are actually not due to the statin, because people had the same effects on placebo as statin for the most part. So I think, I would just say that if you can't do the crossover, subjective outcomes are fatally flawed. I agree with Peter there, but if you could do the crossover, it may be one of the best ways to deal with subjective outcomes.
Great. Thank you. The next question from the audience: does Dr. Brannon or others have specific ideas for what blended models addressing both public health and individual needs for health behavior change that includes equitable access and high quality standards for implementation might look like, what that might look like? Any thoughts?
So I had more questions than I had answers on that. And I saw another question about precision nutrition versus personalized nutrition. And for me, some of this connects, because what I've heard in this meeting, precision nutrition is a research approach that looks for the uniqueness of the individual in order to develop algorithms that can predict individualized recommendations. And I thought a lot about, before I said individualized recommendations, because I also think precision nutrition is a research approach that can inform the public health model. So that's one way we can blend. I think the other question that is, the other issue that's inherent in this question is, what does it look like for the consumer? And I thought a lot about the provocative issue raised about how you might deal with the nutrition facts panel if we knew there was a particular subgroup that needed a different CDRR than the population as a whole. And I can imagine that you might someday have to have a nutrition facts panel that was 5 times the size of the food product container as we learn more. And I wondered if we could have an approach where the public health model said, this is what we recommend in general. If you have some of these characteristics, here are places you can go to get a tailored recommendation for your own unique need. So that and I know that's too many words and it's not simple and the marketing people won't like it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think we need a simple message to people that helps them understand, in general, this is what you can do, which of course they don't do. But in specific, here's where you can go to find out what your own unique needs are. And if we can think about ways in which we have this blended model. And the other thing that I would say is we already have a blended model. We have RDs in clinical settings and in community settings and in private practice who are seeing individuals and working with those individuals with a variety of motivational interviews, sometimes based on behavioral change theory, sometimes not, that are also already trying to, quote, tailor the diet, generally speaking, to those persons' preferences, not necessarily their unique needs. So I think we have places where we can build as we think about the future. It's not an either or situation. And I guess that was one of the points I wanted to make.
Great, thanks. And Josh, did you want to chime in here?
Yeah, I wanted to build a little bit on the kind of the personal precision, because I agree with what Dr. Brannon is saying with respect to precision nutrition being more around what we can measure or demonstrate. At the end of the day, though, I'm going to come back to I strongly, or I feel strongly about the term personal nutrition when it comes to implementation. There's two reasons for this. I mean, one of which has been talked a lot about during this conference. The social aspect of food, the hedonistic aspect of food, the personal choices. As I mentioned in my talk, you're not going to get somebody that's hardcore keto and get them to change their food religion. And I say food religion purposefully because oftentimes it's that way for a specific choice that somebody is making. So it is personal. The other thing, though, too, when it comes to precision nutrition that I'm a little bit cautious about is nutrients by definition hit lots of targets. Mm-hmm. And so I get a little bit worried when we get caught up in being too precise, because I fundamentally don't feel that we would have survived as a species if we had kind of a one nutrient, one target sort of physiology. We've talked a lot about a systems-based approach, and understanding a systems-based approach is understanding how those multiple targets and multiple nutrients interact physiologically as well as behaviorally and environmentally. So for those reasons, I'm a bit biased to personal, but I will say that from an implementation standpoint, if we don't think about people's food behaviors as personal, it won't work irrespective of the science, the guardrails, the regulations, or other things that can be created to help provide that guidance.
Thanks. Looking at our panel members, we might move along. So the next question kind of relates to this as well. How do the speakers envision full personalized nutrition models as applying to family meals, with each person maybe having received their own individualized food prescriptions or school meal programs, school lunch programs, etc.? So again, kind of getting to the implementation of this, and what does that look like on a broad scale?
Well, I can say that we've, sad to say, implemented that in my family, in which everybody seems to get their own meal, whether we like it or not. And it's not pretty. It's a lot of work. And I do think that it does go to the fundamental question here, which is, when is imprecise good enough, right? That seems to be part of the question. And we accept degrees of imprecision on occasion because it's just a simpler way of communicating. And we have to take into account here the ways in which increased precision could mean increased complexity and increased confusion. I don't have a solution to that. I mean, I think there are examples where it's been well done. There are cardiovascular disease risk calculators, for example, that ask individuals, they're available on the internet, to drop in their gender, their age, their LDL level, and whether or not they have hypertension. And out pops an estimate of risk for the incidence of cardiovascular disease in the forthcoming 10 years. I don't think any harm has been done by that. In fact, I think it's rather helpful, and I applaud the availability of that to the general public. But that's based on quite solid data. And until such time as we have data as strong as that, I do worry about this increased precision and the cost and increased confusion.
Yeah, I think this just brings up a huge. I think precise enough is really an important term because I was just thinking. My grandfather was a Baptist minister, and if you thought, it's not just your family, it may be your tribe. Wednesday nights and Friday nights, your diet, my diet was not determined by what I wanted to eat or what my family wanted to eat. It was what was available in the church. And I think many people have similar circumstances that have to be accounted for. And so this is just another component of it. And I'm sure we'll develop algorithms that may combine in precision in a way that allows a family to eat together and find a happy medium if it's not a very specific nutritional need. Also, just wanted to point out when the question came up about what to do about labels, eventually, I know we're going to get there. And it's going to be, you take your cell phone, and just like we're all used to getting into sporting events or shows now with a barcode and flashing it on your cell phone, almost everybody in the U.S. Does that now. And there's no reason you couldn't combine what's in your cell phone with what's on the food label to get a specific adaptation of that label for what's best for you, to the extent that the knowledge is known. And, this is 10 or 20 years from now, probably, but I didn't think we'd be talking to our cars when we wanted to drive somewhere 10 years ago, but we sure are doing it now. So to me, this is a pretty good solution to the problem, and it's technologically a total it's not a technological issue. That's pretty easy. It's a matter of having the evidence and getting it instantiated.
So I'd like to comment that prior to the pandemic, this issue probably was less prevalent because families have been decreasing the number of meals that they eat together, or households have been decreasing it. But the pandemic really brought people back to the table, literally, together. I think there are a couple of issues. One is the issue for whomever, or how many whomevers are actually acquiring the food and preparing it, and those aren't necessarily the same people. I think about individuals with celiac disease who must avoid gluten. It isn't often that the whole family makes that choice. So we have models, clinical models, where people are adjusting what they do. I also think this is a way in which, as individualized recommendations are developed based on precision nutrition and the kind of platforms that are available, particularly the hybrid model, this is a place where the coach or the dietitian can actually work with people, because they bring the expertise that blends the nutrient recommendations with the food. And you might have family with a variety of different needs, but there are foods and meals that you can find and that you can plan that have some similar components and maybe a few different components. So I think there are ways to approach this, but it's definitely not how we thought about it in the past.
Thanks, Patsy. And I think Josh was wanting to chime in here.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to build on what Patsy was saying, because I agree with what she's saying in terms of the strategy. And this was one of the number one questions that we got at Habit about, like, okay, I'm on this program, how can my family eat? I think the good news from a consumer trend standpoint, although maybe not such good news from a dietary intake recording standpoint, is people really are doing a lot more of these mixed dishes and casseroles that lend themselves well to different, more personalized approaches to constructing the meal. So, you could be thinking about, one person is adding more greens to the plate, another person is holding off on, the wraps, depending on what their preferences or needs might be. And it's a good way to come together. I think that there's two things that allows you to do. One of which is, encourages some food exploration by families, because they get to try different things and talk about it, and hopefully encourage good habits. But also, too, I think it's important in terms of how do you actually implement personalization. It's not these hard and fast, you need to get 30% protein, you need 28% protein. It's, can you get more quality protein? Can you bring more leafy greens in? And I think if you start with a relatively healthy base for those meals, that's a great way to start. And it's a great way, kind of coming back to what's happened during the pandemic, bringing us back together around the socialization of food, but it can teach good habits while meeting individual needs as well.
Great, thank you.
And I would say, I think there's a marketing opportunity for people that have platforms, because the popularity of cooking shows and meal preparation shows is just going through the roof, whether it's YouTube or streaming or whatever. And so, I don't know how many of the precision nutrition platforms are actually taking it to that level of coaching, but sometimes for individuals, hearing do this, do that, eat lots of this, eat less of that, that doesn't translate into a meal. And so helping individuals with practical examples of what those meals might look like that are tasty, because lots and lots of research shows people can know what they should do and they can be motivated to do it, but the number one factor influencing what people choose to eat is taste.
Right. And I'm seeing, I was seeing vigorous head nods from Rob. But it looks like, Christina, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I mean, taste and convenience. I think we just want to remember that a lot of people, even in the pandemic, are not able to sit down and prepare a family meal. They might have multiple jobs. They might have to, stop in a lot of fast food restaurants. And then I just really worry about adding this complexity of now multiple people have to eat different things in your family. I really liked Peter's point around sort of what's good enough. And I think we want to be thinking about, for this, segment of the population, maybe there are solutions around the kinds of prepared meals that you could pick up at supermarket or restaurants or things. Like, we've just got to make it really easy and convenient, and it has to taste good, because there's just a whole group of people that are not going to be able to make family meals and tailor it to all the different people in the family, or have, any ability to do that. So just want to make sure we remember that.
Yeah, thank you. And Rob, I don't know if you wanted to add anything in particular, or.
I think Dr. Brannon hit the nail on the head as far as I'm concerned. That it would be, I don't think written charts and tables can compete with an appealing person fixing a meal on streaming video and or TV. And I think if you walk in almost any home in America today, you'll see the cooking shows prominently cycling through. So that's a real opportunity to connect the right side of the brain with the left side of the brain in a way that makes a lot of sense.
Right. Or as Christina was saying, system 1 and system 2, potentially.
Mm-hmm.
So another question that had come in was about, in a food forum workshop from last year, suggesting that food system could be improved to be more equitable and nourishing. And so, considering the food system as a whole, how does personalized nutrition fit into that larger picture? Can these approaches improve food access, for instance? So I don't know if folks have thoughts on that. This personalized nutrition, precision nutrition approach within a broader food systems framework. Or thinking.
So this is Mark Hahn. This is really beyond my area of expertise, but I'll say it anyway. I think where there's an opportunity here is when you start looking at some of the food deserts we have in communities of color, and the fact that they don't have access to the type of foods that are recommended by the dietary guidelines provides an opportunity to see through some of these legislative changes, can we have better access? I'd be really interested to hear Christina's perspective in terms of, perhaps I'm wrong here, but I think most people know the type of foods they're supposed to eat, but knowing what you're supposed to eat and being actually able to have access to them and afford them may be two very different things. So I think that where there's an opportunity here is using the technology, using what actually we have enough science today that we could be advocating for better access, so that the people who are in communities that are underserved by access to fresh produce could actually have some type of support, so that they have the access and can choose the healthier diets that they need.
Peter?
Well, I guess at first blush, not having considered this question at great depth before, it's hard for me to see where, at least with respect to price, there'd be increased access associated with personalized nutrition. I think what we learn from the pharmaceutical area is that more recent drugs have tended to be for more restricted populations, and the companies have compensated by charging even more per drug. And it seems to me that that might be what would happen here. I'm not a marketer, but clearly people are willing to pay more for something that they believe is particularly for them. And if a company learns that people are willing to do that, they'll likely jack up the price to have the right point, the right pricing point. So I worry that if anything, prices may go up, and that, of course, has a predictable impact upon access.
There's a reason that Whole Foods are where they are, and I think this is a really important issue. Like a lot of things, it may boil down to transparency, because if we look at modern day logistics and the ability to know where things are in a geospatial framework, it's not hard to see exactly where the grocery stores are. And there's no reason why in the food supply chain, since much of it is based on barcoded transfer from one to another, in that environment, why you couldn't begin to look at equitability of distribution of proper food and nutrition to the right places. It would make a lot of people uncomfortable if it were transparent, which is one of the reasons it's not.
I also think we need to think about how we talk about the food system. So I'm going to use the example of fruits and vegetables. So I often hear people not just say, eat more fruits and vegetables, eat fresh fruits and vegetables and more fresh fruits and vegetables, and yet minimally processed fruits and vegetables, frozen, those canned without added sugar or added salt or minimally added salt. They're just as nutritious as fresh, and they're a whole lot cheaper. And for individuals that are in challenging living circumstances, they don't spoil the same way fresh fruits and vegetables do. So I think it's incumbent on us as we think about food literacy to be careful that we don't introduce an unneeded myth into the messaging that we give, so that people can make the choice that meets all of the various factors that they have to weigh when they're choosing their food.
Thanks, Patsy, for that. And Josh?
I think it's an interesting challenge, because we think about things like trends and sustainability, and so whether or not personalization can actually increase access. If personalization takes hold, I do suspect that, food waste in the system may increase. Now, that's a problem, but that's also an opportunity in that it can create more access to those foods. And I love what Patsy's saying about, doing some level of minimal processing to allow those foods to be shipped across the supply chain. The challenge is accessibility to the people that could do the transformation of them, and the fact that, oftentimes it may not be the same types of food. It may be okay. It could be, maybe using some of that as, say, blended infant foods. But I do think that we also have to kind of consider the potential challenge that comes with that it's sort of, here's, a whole food strategy of personalized, vegetable plates, taking, the seconds or the waste, and then that's being processed. And then you have two different food supplies for different, people of different means. And I think that's something that we would need to wrestle with, because I think that coming back to your earlier point about, the transparency of the system, people are going to demand transparency of the system. We may improve access to the food, but it may be a situation that fundamentally it's viewed as that part of the populations are getting seconds. And what's the messaging around that? How do we manage that challenge?
Right. So we'll be wrapping up, or we're moving towards wrapping up now. But Christina, I don't know if you had wanted to chime in there on anything. One question I'll just say before I turn over to you. I know that with over the 3 days, just heard some fascinating talks on the science, the advances in technology, and all of the potential there. But then very real challenges with some of the implications for that from a regulatory perspective, from a population health guidance perspective, but still so much promise overall. Is there anything, I'll go around each to everybody, anything particular that is, given knowing all of the challenges, but is there something that is particularly giving you hope or that you're finding particularly exciting about this area?
I'll start because I have to drop off in a minute. Yeah, despite my healthy dose of skepticism, I actually find this all really inspiring. I mean, I think the science is fascinating. I think there are real opportunities that, of course, I can't dream of. Many people right now, we can't even predict what it's going to open up. And I would never say we shouldn't try to learn as much as possible about these issues. I am really encouraged just about the dialogue and the kinds of questions that are going to push us to think, okay, well, how do we incorporate some of these environmental, political, economic, social perspectives? And I think the more and more people from those disciplines can come together and think about that, the more likely we are to achieve something there. So I'm feeling hopeful as we end.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And we'll just go briefly through just 15 seconds or so with everybody, and maybe in the order that we presented. So maybe Peter next.
Well, I see hope in just the same places as Christina does. I think the science is exciting. I think the fact that we're discussing these things at the level that we are early on is exciting, because what you don't want is to allow the technology to get far down the pike without a proper conversation. And to some degree, that's what happened with GMOs. A technology which I think has certain useful applications, but where conversations didn't happen early, and then you have the spread of misinformation. That's a bad situation all around. So I'm glad to have been invited, and I'm glad to have heard everybody else's presentation here today.
Thanks so much, Peter. Rob, what's giving you hope?
Well, I mean, the science is fantastic, not just the biological science, but the behavioral and social science and the ability to measure the environment and interactions. I think I have great hope for that.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Josh?
Yeah, 5 years ago, a conference like this would be all around like the biological measurement tools. So I love to see the kind of diversity of the audience and how we're talking about bringing all this together in a systems-based approach. Secondarily, from a business standpoint, all you ever heard was kind of this like hemming and hawing around the fact that, well, yeah, it's going to be for wealthier people, and eventually it'll, and we're having active talks about how do we make this accessible and affordable if we believe it's going to be meaningful. So yeah, I mean, actually, each day I felt hopeful, because not that we have all the answers, but I think we're beginning the dialogue with the right groups of people to get there.
Wonderful. Thank you. Manu?
Yeah, I tend to be an eternal optimist. We've been talking about personalized and precision nutrition, I think, for 20 years, and I'm actually seeing progress being made, and it's much closer than I actually thought was the case. And so I'm very excited about seeing technology coming together and nutrition science advancing. And I think it's just a great position to be in. I'm really glad that the Food Forum sponsored this discussion.
Great, thank you. And I'll just note before I turn to Patsy, it was so nice to see the synergy with your presentation and Dr. Hilliard, that one of the very first presentations, this very nice arc throughout the workshop, ancestral DNA, talking about sodium in West African populations, and then you bringing that in all together. So last word to you, what is giving you hope? What's exciting from your perspective?
Well, what's really exciting to me is the intersection of the biology, the social behavioral, the psychosocial, and behavioral change. And I think that is exciting to me because there's a real chance to innovate here, and not just innovate in personalized nutrition with individual recommendations, but also to innovate in terms of public health and the public health approach, because I think that we can learn from what is effective in the personalized nutrition platforms, especially the hybrid models, and think about what that might mean for how we implement public health guidelines in general. And so that gives me a lot of hope.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to our speakers, all of our panelists, for your excellent presentations and thoughtful reflections here. And I'd like to thank everybody in the audience for their thoughtful questions. And also particular thanks to the National Academy staff, Cypress Links and Heather Cook as well. So thank you to everybody. I will pass it over to Eric to close the workshop.
Thanks very much, Robin. I'd also like to pass along some thanks first to the attendees. We had over 1,200 registered attendees, so it really was an outstanding event, and maybe does show you one of the advantages of having a Zoom meeting where we can get lots of people to participate in these meetings. Also, thanks to the speakers, not only today, but all 3 days. Professionalism was really great. We were right on time for all of our sessions, and content was unbelievably good. Also, thanks to the planning committee, they did a stellar job, especially Cindy, Bruce, and Robin, who did great jobs moderating. And again, to Cypress Links and Heather Cook, who do all the hard work behind the scenes. So just a reminder to everybody, the workshop will have the presentations and the videos on the Food Forum website in 1 to 2 weeks. And also there'll be 2 publications that will come out of this meeting. One in the fall that will be a brief proceedings of the meeting, and then the full proceedings will be sometime in early 2022. Thanks again, and hope to see you at the next Food Forum event.